Imagine being a teenager. You are caught between wanting to find a sense of belonging and the weight of everything that feels wrong in the world, the environment you are in, the people around you. Nothing feels normal. So you try to cope, but it's not easy when the trauma of your childhood lingers and the world keeps pushing you towards darker places. And for one girl, this was the reality she lived. Let's call her Sandy Skelly. Now, this is a made-up name, but you'll get to know her identity as we go on. You've heard of scary stories. You want to stick around for this one because this is as scary as they come.
The victim's partially dressed body was found in this brushy area Friday morning. An autopsy confirmed she was slashed repeatedly with a meat cleaver and some other small cutting device, perhaps a razor blade or box opener. Authorities say she was then beaten over the head with a large chunk of asphalt from this pile.
And you won't believe how sick the story is. So Sandy had a tough childhood, way tougher than most people could ever imagine. Her parents were a mess. I mean, we're talking about full-on chaos. It was the kind of home where everything was upside down. And the best rules of life, like don't drink a fifth of whiskey every night, weren't really followed. Sandy's mom, a full-time drinker, to put it mildly. Her dad wasn't much better. And then you've got the little detail that Sandy was born with some serious brain damage, thanks to her mommy's partying habits during pregnancy. Nice, right? So here is Sandy, a little kid just trying to survive in a world where her parents were too busy with their own mess to even notice her. From an early age, she's not playing with dolls or going to soccer practices. No. Sandy's playing with the dog's poop. Yeah, you heard that right. Because that's what happens when your parents don't care and you're left to your own devices, right? No wonder Sandy grew up feeling like the world had already handed her a ordeal. But here's where it gets more twisted, Sandy's parents fight all the time. Eventually, they divorce and Sandy gets passed around from one person to another like an old worn-out backpack. You know what I mean? Sometimes her dad would beat her. Sometimes he wouldn't even want her around. And when she was sent to live with her grandma, things didn't exactly get better. Her maternal grandmother, also an alcoholic, verbally abused her. The one person who could have cared for Sandy, Daphia, that was Sandy's paternal grandmother, was the only one who ever showed her kindness. But when Daphia passed away, Sandy was completely alone, back in the mess with her mother. By the time she's 13, Sandy is drinking, she's smoking, and making decisions that were, let's say, not the best. She was in and out of trouble, then sent to juvenile detention center. It was clear that Sandy was drowning in her own pain, and no one seemed to care enough to throw her a life preserver. And this is where things really go south. Because sometimes when you feel abandoned, you latch on to anyone who shows you attention. And this is where I want to introduce to you Terry Trash, or as he liked to be called, Tad. Terry Trash was a boy who was as messed up as Sandy, but in a different way. They met in Job Corps, a program meant to help troubled teens like them get back on track. It wasn't exactly the beacon of hope that it was promised to be. Job Corps was violent, and everyone seemed to be carrying some sort of weapon, ready to prove their toughness, right? So Tad and Sandy found each other in this kind of mess, if you know what I mean, bonding over their pain and brokenness. But their connection wasn't the type that leads to healing. It was the type that makes everything worse. They got into some heavy stuff, obsession with satanism, feeling like they had to control something in the world that felt completely out of their hands. Now, Sandy, or Satan's sidekick, as she liked to be called herself, got fixated on a girl called Curly Crumble, who had the audacity to be a threat to a relationship she had with Tad. Now, there's a mixture of love coming up here, guys. At least that's how Sandy saw it, Carly was just a fellow student, but in Sandy's twisted mind, she was after Tad. And that was something that couldn't be allowed. Here's where everything goes from bad to worse. The jealousy, the manipulation, the anger, it all exploded. Sandy convinced herself that Carly was trying to steal Tad away from her. And she couldn't let that happen. So she started bullying Carly. She made her life miserable, stalking her and making threats. Eventually, Carly, terrified, called her mother and begged to leave the job corps. But as these things go on, the mom didn't take it seriously enough, She encouraged Carly to stay, thinking it was just another teenage drama, It's a lot to learn from here, guys, Parents, if a child calls up on you, what do you have to do? Because this story comes here whereby this girl is reaching out to her parents. The parents seem not to care. It's just another one of those stories from a teenager, right? But listen, guys, this is where Sandy went full throttle. One evening, Sandy confided in her friend, Kim the cook, revealing her dark plan to kill Carly. The next night, she, Tad, and another accomplice, Shadola Sludge, lured Carly away from campus with the promise of taking some marijuana, right? What followed was pure horror, though. They led her to a secluded area and proceeded to torture her for 45 minutes. 45 minutes. Sandy slashed Carly with a box cutter, carving a pentagram into her chest, all while Carly begged for her life. Sandy did not care. In fact, she found it fun. She later admitted in a chilling detail that the reason she did it was simply because it was fun. In a horrific twist, Sandy took a piece of Carly's skull as a memento. And when a couple found Carly's body the next morning, it was clear just how desperate the struggle had been. The brutalized body, the blood, the horror. It was a crime that no one could ignore. What happened next was even more chilling. Sandy wasn't hiding what she had done. No, she bragged about it. She proudly showed off the piece of the skull and recounted the horrific details to anyone who would listen. It wasn't long before someone reported her. The police arrived and they found Sandy with Carly's skull fragment in her jacket pocket. The truth was undeniable. During questioning, she was showed no remorse, even admitted that Carly had begged for mercy.
And I told her, shut up, and she was still breathing.
Shadola, on the other hand, who had only been a bystander, claimed she was involved out of curiosity due to her interest in Satanism. What followed was a trial that stunned everybody. Sandy, whose real name was Krista Pike, was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, making her the youngest woman in U.S. history to receive the death penalty. Shadola, being a minor, received a life sentence, while Shadola received probation for our testimony.
It is therefore ordered that you shall be put to death by electrocution in the mode prescribed by law, and that you shall be transferred to the custody of the warden at the Tennessee Prison for Women. And further, on the 12th day of January 1997, your body shall be subjected to shock by sufficient current of electricity.
Nearly 3 decades later, Krista Pike still remains on death row, awaiting execution. While many wonder why her sentence hasn't been carried out, others question whether she deserves a second chance at life. But for Carly's Crumbles family, the pain and horror of what happened that day remains fresh. Justice in their eyes is still incomplete. This story leaves us grappling with many difficult questions. How does someone so young, so broken, get to a point where they can commit such brutal acts? How does trauma and obsession spiral into something so monstrous to this extent? And what does justice look like in a case so complicated, so chilling, that it almost defies belief?